Thanks everyone for having me. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share a bit about SIKU with all of you. And I actually have some questions for you as well. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation at the end. It's also great to know what the nature of your work is for me to understand a bit better how SIKU might be relevant to your own work. So I'm here to share a little bit about SIKU, the Indigenous Knowledge Social Network. SIKU is primarily a tool for Indigenous-led research, but it can also support meaningful engagement for Southern researchers with Indigenous communities. If you want to follow along, you can download SIKU from the App Store or Google Play Store, or you can use the QR code here and download it up and set up an account as we go, just so you can also take a look around at what's there. So we'll start with what SIKU is, and then I'll share a little bit about where it came from, why this tool and platform was developed, and we'll look at what can be shared on SIKU, what kinds of services and posts it can be offered on SIKU, and then I'll share a little bit about projects that are using SIKU as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about permafrost on SIKU towards the end. So SIKU is a web and mobile platform developed by and for Indigenous communities. It was created by the Arctic Eider Society, which is the organization I work for, and we're based in Senekilluwak in Nunavut in the Belcher Islands, so the southeast Hudson Bay. We're an Indigenous-led nonprofit, and you might be familiar with some of our earlier projects or the projects that sort of form the heritage of our organization, like the Voices from the Bay publication and the film People of a Feather. The Arctic Eider Society grew out of initiatives like these that advocated for Indigenous self-determination in environmental stewardship. They're both really excellent resources and interesting materials, so I highly recommend checking them out if you're not familiar with them already. Other things that the Arctic Eider Society has done that have laid the groundwork for where we are today, we work with a number of communities in the East Hudson Bay, Kuujjuarapik, Umiak, and Inukjuak, as well as Senekilluwak, on regional monitoring around the impacts of hydro developments in the region. And this is actually part of where SIKU came from, that there was a desire among the hunters in these communities to observe the changes, like they were already seeing changes, they wanted to find a way to record them and also share and communicate with each other. So on the left here, you have a map of sort of the jurisdictional complexity of the region that the Arctic Eider Society is rooted in. And on the right, a screenshot from SIKU of all the CTD castaways and water monitoring and sampling that's been done as part of this sort of project in East Hudson Bay. Now we work across Inuit-Nunagat and with other Northern Indigenous communities, and we support programs for environmental monitoring, research, and education that support thriving Indigenous communities. One of our big core projects is SIKU. So we worked with communities across the north to develop SIKU. It had sort of a beta phase, and then it was formally launched in 2019 at ArcticNet. So we're going to now actually dive in a little bit to what SIKU itself is. The first thing to know is that there are 4 core principles that inform both how SIKU has been developed, continues to develop, and also that inform what we ask, or well, I guess they're the terms that we ask everyone to agree to shape how they engage with the platform and how they use it as well. So the first core principle is respect for Indigenous knowledge and rights. The second is that this is a tool for self-determination. It's supposed to, its goal is to make it easier for communities to run their own projects. The third, which is a really important one, and especially relevant, I think, when we're thinking about Southern researchers engaging with Northern research or Northern communities, is that all users own their posts and any content that they put on SIKU. So intellectual property ownership is really important. Just because someone can see what you're posting on SIKU doesn't mean they're allowed to use it. And the last one is integrity of information. We just ask that people make sure that the content they're sharing on SIKU is real, that the people who are posting these things are real. SIKU is used, among other things, for sharing dangerous ice information. And so we want to make sure that anything we're saying about what potentially dangerous travel conditions is accurate and real. So these guiding principles are what makes SIKU a safe space for sharing knowledge. And this is also one of the main things that distinguishes it from other social media platforms, as well as other what would be called like citizen science apps. For example, many hunters have experienced harassment on Facebook for making posts sharing about hunting. Sealskin products are often taken down from Facebook because they violate the terms of use. More sensitive harvesting stories people face harassment for taking part in different hunts on these other platforms. So we wanted to make sure that SIKU was a safe space for Indigenous knowledge and for hunting stories. And so, the experiences that maybe happen on other platforms are really because those terms of service, those terms of use are designed for other communities and other regions. They're not really reflecting the reality of the North. So we wanted to make sure that SIKU places Indigenous knowledge first and makes it a safe space for sharing all of these all knowledge and stories. So in addition to being a safe space, we want to make sure that SIKU provides all the services and tools that can be useful for hunters and land users. So SIKU is also a place where you can access good quality maps. You can see Indigenous place names, there's satellite imagery, weather services, ice maps, and many other kinds of services. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. But I wanted to just go back a little bit to where SIKU came from. So one thing is this desire to have a safe space for sharing knowledge. Another is recognizing the value, and then there's also the work that was being done across communities in East Hudson Bay. And then there was also really a desire among community members in Sanikiluaq to see their knowledge being taken seriously and to assert the value of Indigenous knowledge. So in particular, this elder Pita Katuk really has been a big inspiration for SIKU. He was a hunter, he was on the land every day, he had a lot of knowledge, and he was observing changes and felt that his knowledge was not taken seriously by researchers, and in fact had the experience of sharing some of the changes he had been observing and receiving the feedback of, well, we have to come and validate that. We'll have to do like a 5-year project to sort of confirm that what you're saying is true, and then we can sort of evaluate why it's happening. And what Pita was asking was, can you tell me why it's happening? I already know that it's happening. So he felt that his knowledge was not being taken seriously because it wasn't written down, and researchers often relied on what is written. And so Pita wanted a tool that would make it easier for harvesters to document what they knew about the land and give them more power when they were sitting across the table from government, researchers, or industry, and demonstrate the value of their knowledge. So I mentioned Pita was observing a number of changes. In particular, one thing he noticed was changes in the seal stomach contents, the seal diets, as he was harvesting. And so actually, this became one of the first projects that used SIKU from 2019 to 2021, I believe. Community members in Sanikiluaq posted whenever they caught a seal, they would take a picture of what was in the stomach contents of the seal, and all this data was stewarded to the same project on SIKU, and it was possible then to analyze the data and find that actually, there was a change happening, and it was from winter to summer, sort of a change in diet. And this was an Inuit conceived, led, conducted, and analyzed project from start to finish using SIKU as its primary tool. And things have grown in Sanikiluaq since then. Here we go. The Hikate project, Sanikiluaq is working on establishing a protected and conserved area for the islands called the Hikate project, and they use SIKU as a tool to record baseline data about wildlife, berries, ice conditions, sort of the broad spectrum of the ecology of the islands. And because this tool can be on someone's phone or on the land, it's very easy for it to become the whole of community. It has become a whole of community approach, and the findings can be quite significant. So this is September 2020 to August 2021, over 150 people were posting. There were almost 5,000 observations and records made in that year about different harvests. So when people were going out fishing, they would post about the char that they caught, or the seals, or the eider, or when they were picking eggs from the eider ducks, or even harvesting down from eider ducks. All of these things are being recorded on SIKU, and together they were able to produce some really interesting data, record interesting data that was just from the day-to-day activities of the community. And this is another visual representation of this. This is of the trips that were taken, again, over like a year's period, over 5,000 trips, almost 380,000 kilometers of travel. So this is a really effective way of seeing common travel routes, land use practices, and this kind of thing. And again, this data is being used by the Hecate Steering Committee to help guide the process of establishing a protected area in Senekilluaq. And here's just maybe a little less of a tidy representation, but when you look on SIKU on the map on the website, this is just some of the things that people have seen, harvested, made posts about in Senekilluaq for the Hecate project. There's geese harvests there, there's ice observations, berry picking, all kinds of things. And all of these observations and all of this data is contributing to a community-led project towards establishing a protected area. There's a lot of data. I'm going to move through it quite quickly. There's a really good presentation from Lukasi Aragutenak and Joel Heath from last year's ArcticNet that I can share with others about sort of current status of the Hecate project if people are interested later. This is another pretty cool graphic though. So because this project has been ongoing for a number of years, it's now possible to compare year-to-year trends. So for example, berry harvests from 2020 to 2021, you can see the change in seasonality. And this reflects the knowledge that also elders were sharing in the community at the same time, and sort of validated and backed up the knowledge that was being shared in the community. This is climate data collected by Inuit. And then this is still building on the work of the long-standing work in Senekilluaq around environmental knowledge, Inuit knowledge, and environmental monitoring and observation. So there was an Inuit resource calendar that was produced for Voices from the Bay from interviews with elders and oral interviews. And then we've been able to bring that calendar together with the data from SIKU and produce this graphic that really shows it's a very similar, things that map out quite similarly to the way that they were described in Voices from the Bay, but then also you can see where changes are starting to happen, which is quite interesting. And then it's not just something that's being used within communities at a smaller scale. SIKU is also being used cross-regionally. So we run 2 challenges every year, an Ice Watch and a Goose Watch challenge. The Ice Watch is a challenge to promote ice safety and sharing ice knowledge within communities, but also across communities. So it can, and this is a map from, I think, 2 years ago, the challenge, and all of the posts that were created during that time period. Similarly, we run a Goose Watch challenge once a year to help track the spring goose migration from Cree communities around James Bay, all the way north through Inuit Nunangat. So these challenges really demonstrate the capacity of Indigenous communities to also contribute to monitoring at scale across broad regions. I just wanted to give you a bit of a glimpse of what's possible with SIKU, where it came from, a little bit of a taster of some of the really strong projects that are on SIKU. We'll come back to projects a bit later as well, but now I wanted to show you what is on SIKU in terms of like what can be posted and what kinds of tools and services are on SIKU for users. So just to quickly orient you to SIKU, along the bottom of the app, that's how you navigate across. You have the feed where people's posts are visible. So this is, you can either have for all communities, for your own community, or you can even just choose to see your own posts. And this, of course, depends on the privacy settings that people have chosen. But for the most part, this is where you can see other people's posts. You also have the maps. We'll go back to the maps in a moment. My Post, which is where you can manage all your own posts, including making sure that posts are uploaded, and your My Activity summary is accessed from here, which I'll also show you in a moment. And then the Explore panel, where you manage all your settings, including privacy and location services and stewardship, data stewardship settings. And you can also browse. You could go and look at a wildlife profile and see what are all the posts about ringed seals that are being made right now, and that kind of thing. But maps are one of our biggest services on SIKU that we offer. We provide a SIKU base map, which is brings together topographic and bathymetric data on one map made available for free for the first time for Indigenous users. And then there's a mosaic satellite map. Those two can be downloaded. Actually, users can select the area and download them to use offline. The other maps that we have, the satellite imagery, those are not available offline because they change too often. But they can be cached by sort of navigating around, and also are just a really excellent resource for travel planning. So we have Sentinel 1, 2, and 3, as well as Landsat 8 and MODIS. And then we also have oh yes, and you can even navigate back to see, for example, when you're looking at a post, what did the conditions actually look like at the time that post was made. You can do that on the app as well as on the web platform. And then we also have the ice map, which shows roughness and thickness of sea ice. And this is bringing together Canadian Ice Service charts and satellite imagery, radar imagery, to produce an ice map that provides the kind of information that's needed for safe travel over the ice. And actually is being ground truth. We're working with Inuit to sort of train some machine learning algorithms for making sure that we train this map to actually better recognize rough conditions and the various sort of more detailed ice features that are still relevant for on ice travel. And users can sort of toggle things on and off, manage their maps. You can see Goose Watch posts or Ice Watch posts on the map if you want. And you can always see Indigenous place names on the map. This is available on any map layer. You have to make sure that it's on. And then it's also available on the web platform. And we work with regional sort of groups and governments that are sort of stewarding these place names, such as Inuit Heritage Trust or the Makivik Corporation, to make these place names available on a GPS, essentially, that people are using in their hands out on the land, rather than leaving these names all on a map on a wall. And this has actually been one thing that we've seen brings people to SIKU, even without knowing anything else about it. We added the place names for Greenland in November of last year, and within a week, hundreds of people had joined SIKU, even though we didn't have it in Greenlandic. We hadn't told anyone in Greenland that this had happened, except for sort of the people we were working with directly there. So it's really something that is well used and a popular feature on SIKU. Another thing another service that we offer, another tool that's available to SIKU users, is the activity summary. And this is a really nice way to see a summary of harvesting activity, which can help for, sort of evaluating cost of gas and return on investment for that, but also for filing taxes and this kind of thing. So that's accessed through the My Posts part of the app. Once you click more, you can see, how many, and you can set a time range. So up through all time, or in the past month, or in the past week, or in sort of a certain period of time. How many char did I catch? how many kilometers did I travel? How many observations did I make about ice? All these things are possible to see. And you can even go sort of in a more detailed view and see specifically how many char did I harvest versus how many char did I post about. And you can see the list of all of the char. For example, you can sort of have a detailed view on a species by species basis. And it's also then possible for you to favorite or pin your posts. And if you pin your posts, then that pins it to the map and you can see it at any time. This is especially useful if you're pinning a trip. You want to follow the same route as you took before. That's possible with this feature on SIKU. We also have weather services on SIKU, which are sort of going through a bit of an update at the moment. So I don't have a screenshot to show you, but those provide information about tides, temperature, wind speed, and direction, and sunrise, sunset, all that information. And that we're also working on a weather post type so that SIKU users can share observations about weather conditions or weather indicators and use their own knowledge and weather terminology to share that information as well. So that will be integrated with the weather services. And finally, it's also important to know that SIKU is designed, again, for the North, for remote communities, so it can be used offline. Posts, the process of making a post, editing it, adding any information that you want, any of that can happen without an internet connection. The trip tracks can be recorded without an internet connection. And it's just the process of uploading it to the platform and then sort of seeing other people's content posts on SIKU that require an internet connection. So those are some of the things we offer on SIKU. And then it's also possible for people to share things themselves. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the types of posts that are available on SIKU that people might share knowledge about. We have wildlife, ice and snow, trips, research, and social posts, and the ship observations as well, although those also kind of fall under the research category. The social posts are our most flexible post. Some might say they're the most basic. It's just a text field and a photo field, but this means that they can be used for all kinds of things. People use them to share about a nice sunset or a tea break. In Sanikiluaq, they've been used to share about the Inuksugit across the islands. In Tuktoyaktuk, they're being used to share about permafrost measurements. In other communities, they're being used to record archaeological sites. So it's really a flexible tool that kind of is catching all the gaps at the moment. And it's a good way for us to also see what people want to be able to post about, and we can sort of work on developing those things. So that's the most simple post type. This is just showing you what it looks like when you decide you're going to make a social post. The ice and snow post is a bit more detailed. You have, again, the ability to take a photo, make a comment, but you can also indicate whether it's dangerous, and that will change the icon that shows up both on the feed and on the map. It will have a little hazard symbol on it. And then also really important is that it's possible to tag ice terms in Inuktitut for the ice and snow posts. So this allows for more precise sharing of knowledge. You're not limited SIKU users are not limited to the very basic language we have in English about ice, but can actually really communicate, where it is in the process of ice formation, how stable it is, what you should be paying attention to. And we have a really good example actually of this being used when an elder in Sanikiluaq, again, back in the early days of SIKU, actually in the beta stage, was using SIKU. He went out to hunt early in the morning. And he had planned a trip in one direction, but he reached a crack in the ice. And from his knowledge, he understood that this was the type of crack that when the wind changed, it would open up and it would be impossible to get back across the water. And so he changed his travel route. He took a picture to capture what it looked like. He decided to go a different way. And then when he was done his day of hunting, he came back again the same way and took another picture of what it looked like then. And you can see on the left, side of the post, on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a picture of the ice in the early morning, and then on the right-hand side, there's the ice at the end of the day when he was heading back home, and you can see that it did in fact open up significantly. And this was because Jonasi had the knowledge about the ice. He knew that this was a sikumak and not a different kind of crack, and that it was going to open up into a flow edge. And actually, the satellite imagery at the time wouldn't have shown that, but by the next day, after he had already posted this and shared this knowledge and information with his community, then the satellite imagery was able to show what he had known was going to happen. So this also helps, I think, for us really illustrate the value of this platform bringing together both Indigenous knowledge and Western science and technology. It's not going to replace, Indigenous knowledge systems, but can sort of strengthen the sharing of those and validate them as well, like show the value of them as well. Another type of trip is is the trip post. And so this is works with the GPS, kind of like if you use any exercise tracking app. It tracks your trip as you go, and you can make posts while you're on your trip as it's running, and those posts will be then linked to your trip on SIKU as well. So you can see here on this trip, someone caught 2 seals and they made all these posts. So then when it's in the feed, you can sort of view all the posts that are linked together. And it also will summarize for you as you're going on your trip how long you've been traveling, how fast you've traveled, how far you've gone, and show you this sort of summary of your activity on the trip as well. Another really powerful tool on SIKU are the wildlife posts. With a wildlife post, you can record a harvesting activity or an observation. And depending on whether it's a harvest or an observation, the fields will be different. And depending on the animal that you've chosen, the fields will be slightly different as well. For example, with the seals, there's an option to record stomach contents, but for some fish or insects, that's not going to be an option there. Another really important part of this post type is that it's possible for people you can use your Indigenous dialect to search for the species. So instead of searching seal, you can search netzel, and then it will pull up the seal in the seals, and then you can select the species and make the post there. So here you can see, for example, a post about fish. It's a harvesting post. It's lake trout, and it's a group harvest. So then it's asking how many were harvested. You can record what kind of capture method, and there's of course more details you can add. It's always possible just to create the post, add a photo, save it, and add more information later. Again, this is an app designed for the north. We know that phones die really fast when it gets really cold. So it's also, we've prioritized making it possible to generate a post as quickly as possible and then add whatever data needs to be added later on by editing the post. And here's a nice little GIF of some of that process. So the final type of post I wanted to mention are the research tool posts. Research tools can be pretty specialized. These are often developed for specific projects that communities are running. We have CTD castaways. I mentioned early on, there was a project in East Hudson Bay where hunters were measuring the changes based from the dams, and that include measuring changes in salinity in the water. There's survey tools there, water monitoring, water sampling, and this is somewhere where we often collaborate with communities or projects to develop the specialized tools that are needed for the work that they're doing. And those are sort of the main tool types on SIKU. I want to quickly talk about the projects on SIKU because I mentioned at the beginning in the core principles of SIKU that every user retains ownership of the things that they're sharing. They retain full control over that data. They can choose to delete it or change it or whatever they would like. But they can also choose to share it, and they can choose to steward it to a project and contribute their knowledge and their observations to a project, whether that's one run by their communities or one that's collaborating with Southern institutions. So slightly different from citizen science apps, where the primary aim is that everyone is sort of by default contributing to a sort of general knowledge like projects altogether. But we want every user to be able to control what they share, how much they share, and with whom. So it's very modifiable. There are settings. I alluded to them. I'm not going to show it, but every user can change their location settings, how visible their post is, whether it shows on the map exactly where the post is, approximately, or not at all. And they can also choose to change the privacy settings so that anyone on SIKU can see their post, or only people who are in their community can see it, or only people who are in the project that they're working on can see it, or only the person who's managing the project can see it. So there's an ability to sort of control on a post-by-post basis, and then also with general defaults, how much of a post people can see. And this can be really helpful for really sensitive projects, like especially if there are sensitive harvesting practices or that kind of thing. And with the location privacy, often, people want to share where the dangerous ice is, but they don't want to share necessarily where their berry picking patch is. And so people can control that completely. And then in addition to those controls, the location and privacy controls, there's the data stewardship. So when someone is on SIKU, they're just using it as an individual member. They have control over their location and privacy settings. If they decided they wanted to contribute to a project, that project would invite them to join. So a project can be created relatively easily, like a Facebook page, and then we offer some support to projects and more in-depth training for project managers. So if you need more information and details after, you can always just reach out to me directly and we can talk more about it. But this project would invite, and this would be alongside whatever ethics agreements, whatever signed papers need to be sort of handled off app. But once the project is created and a user has joined the project, they are then asked whenever they make a post, would you like to tag that project? And it's the act of tagging the project, once they're a member of it, that then shares the data from their post with that project. If someone is a member of the project, but they didn't tag it, their data does not get shared. If they tag the project, but they're not a member, the data does not get shared. So it's sort of a two-way confirmation process to make sure that people know what they're agreeing to, that they have knowledge of the project, and the project manager also has had a conversation with them, and then they're agreeing to share their data. And then once that's set up, it's actually really simplifies the data management process. We have a data dashboard, project management, analytics. You can filter the map to just see projects posts. So these are some examples of that. We have the Arpiat goose nest mapping project that's run as a contest every year by the Akumavik Society, the Nunavik Sentinels project, ArcBio, which is based in the Kitikmeot region, as well as the Pond Inlet Pilot community-based monitoring program. These are just showing a number of the different projects that are on SIKU that have members who are contributing data, or who in the past, like they may be projects that are ended now. But this is where that agreement has been made and that data is being shared. So that's a very quick overview of what is already on SIKU. I wanted to share a little bit about where we're seeing permafrost come up, because of course this is something that's very important to many northern communities. We started in the islands in East Hudson Bay, so permafrost wasn't the number one concern there, but we know more and more this is going to be something that's coming up. And so we really would love to hear from you a little bit about how permafrost knowledge could be shared on SIKU, what kinds of work you're doing that maybe you would like to be able to share on SIKU. And I just wanted to also show you some of the cases where people are already posting about permafrost on SIKU. So I mentioned in Tuktoyaktuk, the smart ice operators there are working on, of course, permafrost monitoring, among other things. So they're posting about pingos. There's two different posts. There are many that they're making about that, but they're using the social post because this is the most flexible feature there. You have a photo, you have the text, but it might be other communities sometimes use the ice post type to record permafrost measurements. We have in Chisasibi someone posting about land erosion, which they attributed to potentially melting of permafrost. In Nunavik as well, there was a big landslide, and this is actually a photo from a plane trip that they took overhead and then took pictures of the landslide. We're hearing more and more from folks in Nunavik that this is a big concern there as well. And so, again, this is, I think, just a trip post that was used to share about what's happening there. And so those are just a few of the examples. People are already using SIKU to share about permafrost. From our conversations, we understand that it might not necessarily always make sense to have a post that's explicitly like a permafrost post, but maybe it's something that becomes embedded in other post types, like the ice post. So I have a couple questions for you, which we can discuss maybe, I don't know if we want to do it before or after questions you have for me, but I'm curious to know, how do you think Indigenous SIKU users might share about permafrost, whether it's more of the same of what I've shown you or other ways that you could anticipate? And also, what kind of information might you be able to share about permafrost on SIKU that would be useful to its Indigenous users, whether that's in the form of maps or reports or other data? I didn't show much of it, but projects do also use SIKU as a platform to share information. Smart Ice uses SIKU as a platform to share ice reports. And even like also there are some projects where researchers will make posts as they're up in the community, sort of sharing, these are the measurements I'm taking, this is what this is for. And then when they have the results of the project, share back the results of that project as well at the end. But these are the two questions sort of I'm curious about, but then I'm also happy to answer if you have any questions for me about SIKU as well.
That's fantastic, Sophie. Thank you very much. I love the way you finished off there, showing some examples of how people have been using these different post types to share what they're observing, or maybe some little measurements that they're taking. If you want to, you can post any questions you have for Sophie in the chat, or if anyone would like to ask any questions or share any of their own experiences. Maybe there are people on here who've used SIKU.
Hi, Sophie. I work in Nunavik, and you just showed some examples of the mud flows there. And on our side, we've been having discussions about best ways to get input from communities about natural hazards and permafrost hazards. And we sort of have a website where people can put in their observations. And I guess earlier on in the research team at Laval, we had talked about maybe using SIKU, but it felt like, actually, I don't know if I'm going to have a question here or just commenting, but, you know, I guess we saw it start as really something that was focused on sea ice and travel on sea ice. And so in Nunavik, we work with Inuit communities also, and Cree communities. And I guess the impression that at least my team had was that it was very different audiences and a different focus. And I see now that you have all kinds of things that are included. I missed some of your presentation today. So I don't know if you said, like, I see you here today, you're talking about how people are using it for permafrost. And there's definitely a need for this kind of interface. And we've been also wondering what's the best way to go and whether SIKU is kind of, I guess our perception was too big and too focused on sea ice, maybe to have room to include like a terrestrial or natural hazards or terrestrial hazards or, you know, a geomorphology component. And I just wanted to share with you that we're talking about that within our team as well. And then I was just texting to the others that I was in your presentation. So we'll talk about SIKU again tomorrow, but there's interest on the Nunavik side for sure. Do you see the possibility of having the room for having an icon that's like permafrost or terrestrial hazards, or you know, like adding? Do you think there's sufficient use to? Maybe you've said it already, and it's in the parts that I missed. But
No, that's a great question. Thanks so much. And honestly, I do think it's a fair assessment. Or in the early days of SIKU, we were very sea ice focused. That was really where SIKU was being used, was in communities where sea ice was like sort of a critical focus. And also, of course, like as we were starting up, we don't have necessarily the capacity to sort of do everything. But I think our priority is really to provide what is useful and needed to Indigenous communities for their monitoring priorities, for their research priorities. And so definitely natural hazards are something that we're hearing a lot. And we're really at a stage of exploration of trying to understand what kinds of things that might include and how best to represent them, whether it means whether it means having a specifically like a permafrost post type, or would it be like having a hazard post type, and then that might include also like flooding and landslides, and like a number of different kinds of things. So definitely, if it's a conversation you're having with your team, we would be really interested in having that conversation with you, because also we really try and be directed by the priorities of community members. So and if there's a clear use case for it, that also helps us really develop things.
Yeah. So if you want, we can. I think it would be good to chat more. Like for Nunavik, we've developed a guide to natural hazards, which is permafrost, but extends beyond it, because we know that when we talk with our community partners, natural hazards is like the mud flow example you just showed is a great example. It happened. It's not permafrost, like it's just outside of the permafrost zone, but the community associates it with permafrost thaw. It brings up concerns related to permafrost thaw and other mud flows. And so, natural hazards are all intertwined in northern territories. Of course, in the terrestrial environment, they interact with permafrost in different ways. And my suggestion would be to keep it together. But we have material developed on that topic, and some collaborative work and training material with communities too, and beginning of a glossary in Inuktitut. So if you would like to have a meeting to talk about collaboration potential or a test zone there where some things are already established, I think Nunavik is a great place for that.
Yeah, that would be great. We work a lot with the Arnuk in Nunavik, and so also having that established partnership as well probably helps with.
I know here at PermafrostNet we've had a few discussions and been chatting with SIKU to explore some of these possibilities. What's needed by communities, and what sort of things might you want to, maybe see if you can incorporate into the app. I think this is going to be a very fruitful conversation going forward. And this is a great opportunity now, while you have Sophie here, though, if you've got any specific questions or something that's just popped into your mind after seeing her presentation.
Thank you very much for beautiful presentation and very knowledgeable presentation. I'm working at National Research Council, and my question regarding the engineering side of the community involvement and adapting the infrastructure and buildings to the permafrost, changing permafrost. And I'm just curious how the engineers can be helpful for the community in terms of community involvement.
The starting point is always like relationship with communities, right? So whether that's spending time there to have the conversations that need to be had, and understand like what the concerns are, so to match up like what knowledge you have at hand and what's being sought. I don't have a lot of we don't do a lot of work around infrastructure. It's a lot more of environmental monitoring.
Okay, thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you.
It was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much, Sophie. I think you've given people a lot to think about, digest, and think of possible next steps, things to include. There's always the possibility, as you pointed out, that you have some very flexible posts, those social posts. If people come across a sinkhole or a part of the road they think is being affected by growing permafrost, they can put up one of those posts. And I'm looking forward to seeing what conversations come out of this. We get more permafrost-related content on there, so that'd be great. And once again, thank you, Sophie. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.